Mantras are these things that we repeat to ourselves. Sometimes we share them with other people in hopes that it might do something for us, right? Or to do something for someone else. But as we know, anything that we say to ourselves over and over again, it's not always necessarily a good thing, right? It can also be a bad thing. Sometimes these things that we say to ourselves can be helpful, and sometimes they're not so helpful, right? This week, I had a couple nights where I was having trouble sleeping, and you all know that feeling where you can't sleep, and you're like, if I fall asleep now, I'll only get this many hours of sleep. Then if I fall asleep now, and I was like, this is a terrible mantra. So I tried to change the mantra, and I was like, all right, it's 2 a.m. This is fine. This is fine, right? And then 3 a.m., you're like, this is still fine. It's still fine. And then 4 a.m. hits. I'm like, this is not fine, Didn't work. The mantra didn't work, okay? And then we also have mantras that we say to other people in hopes that they might see things the way we see them, right? How many of us have ever gone through a hard time and then someone told us, adversity builds character, right? This difficult thing you're going through, it's just building character. And you're thinking, I have enough character. I have plenty of character. I'm overflowing with character. I don't want to have this hard time, right? So sometimes it doesn't help. And then sometimes we just have mantras that come to us spontaneously, and they might not even mean anything. They just arise out of the heat of the moment. Maybe they mean something to us, and maybe not even then. I want to share a clip, kind of a viral video about this mantra that came from one of the world's best bowlers named Pete Weber. And in a heat of the victory kind of moment, he comes up with this mantra that doesn't really make any sense, but clearly means a lot. So check this out.
Strike to claim it. A strike to claim it. And he got it!
That's number 5. Are you kidding me? That's right. Who do you think you are? I am.
Who do you think you are? I am. French philosopher René Descartes once said, I think, therefore I am. And a couple hundred years later, Pete Weber came along and said, who do you think you are? I am. So, I don't know. Maybe that means something to you today, and that could be a mantra for you. But regardless, we all have personal mantras. How many of us could say that we maybe have not even just one, but many personal mantras that mean a lot to us, right? That have been companions for us on our journey of life. And maybe for those of us in this room today where in some form or another we've been on a journey from more of a dogmatic religious background into a more open-minded spirituality, I would venture to say that your mantras probably have a lot of special significance to you in that they've helped you pare down your beliefs or your values into really the root of what matters most, right? Getting rid of the complexity that we so often get lost in, and the simplicity of a mantra can come in and help us in ways that sometimes pages and entire books can't. Take, for example, the mantra, be here now. One of my favorites, and yeah, there it is. It's an invitation into the present moment, right? And it's all happening through 3 simple words. And yet these 3 words, I know in my life, I've found these 3 words can be more effective than sometimes chapters or the entirety of a book, right? Because they bring us into the present moment in a way that complicated language sometimes can't, right? The spiritual teacher Mooji said that you don't need to read books to understand God. You just need to look within. Of course, there's a time to read. I love to read, but there's also a time in life for the simplicity that only mantras can offer us, right? So how is it that mantras help us look within? Well, the word mantra is a Sanskrit word that comes from 2 root words, manas and tra. Manas means mind, and tra means tool. So you might think of a mantra as a tool for thinking or a tool for the mind, something that's there to assist us in the journey of life and of spirituality, which really is getting to know ourselves, our souls, our minds. And these mantras are just tools to help us in that journey, right? And maybe think about some of the tools that have been helpful for you in your life, right? Maybe something like a flashlight that can shine a light into the dark corners of our mind. Maybe it's more like a lawnmower. I know none of us have lawnmowers out here in Tucson, but if you can just imagine living somewhere where there's grass, and our mind sometimes is like an overgrown lawn, and a lawnmower, the lawnmower of the mantra can come along and help clear things out. Or maybe you might think of it as another tool that we all enjoy, a calculator, right? And a mantra can simplify the complex equations of life. But what I love about mantras, as a tool for thinking, they don't tell us what to think. They just assist us as we go through the process of thinking. They allow us to think, but they don't tell us what it is we need to think. For example, think about school. And how really, at its best, school is a place where we're more taught or we should be at least, taught how to think versus being told what to think. That though it's so often not the case, at its best, school might be a place where we are given the tools in learning how to critically think, how to come to our own sense of values, what's important to us, critically thinking about decisions and different things versus just simply being told, this is what you need to think about everything. And how many of us could imagine, gosh, what if religion had functioned like that in my life, right? What if religion was a place where instead of just being told, this is what you need to believe, you were given tools of how to approach your beliefs and how to approach your values in a way that's meaningful to you and to critically think about them. Yet unfortunately, so often, religion, in its dogmatism, gets stuck with telling us this is exactly what you need to think about this or that. And spirituality and the mantras that we come to through spirituality, they're just there to help us get to know who we already are and our inner selves. I love this quote from author Gabrielle Bernstein. She says, a mantra is a mental instrument that fine-tunes your inner vibration, right? It just helps you tune that which is already within. Right? And so there's three aspects of mantras that I think are really powerful in why they're so effective in this function that they hold in our lives. And the first is that mantras, they're subjective rather than objective. How many of us know that the same mantra can mean vastly different things to different people? I'm sure even when I said be here now, everyone had their own version of what that means to them. And that's a beautiful thing. So often religious ideas can feel objective, and that's where we get stuck in dogmatism because we're told there is one way to feel and believe about these certain subjects, right? In fact, the ancient rabbis, they used to think about scripture as a prism, meaning when you hold a prism up to the light, depending on the angle, the colors shift, right? It's always something different that you're seeing depending on how you hold it to the light. And in the same way, what if our spiritual traditions could be like a prism where from different angles and different perspectives, you get different messages and different truths come forward. And yet mantras are so powerful for this because they are inherently subjective, right? They're inherently going to mean different things to different people. We can celebrate that rather than fear that. And there's a reason why mantras are able to be subjective. And the reason is that they are simple rather than overly complicated. Think about something like the Golden Rule, one of the most powerful, ubiquitous mantras in all of history, right? Do unto others as you would have them do to you. It shows up all over the place in all different types of spiritual traditions, religious backgrounds, because it is so simple in its truth that it transcends culture, it transcends language. And this is really the power in it, is its simplicity. When I was growing up, I didn't have siblings for most of my childhood. And so when I was younger, I had 3 older cousins. I still have them, but I had them when I was younger. And they were like my older sisters, right? All female. They were like my older sisters. And, without having brothers to roughhouse with, I loved roughhousing with my older cousins. But they're all fairly older than me, so they always had the advantage. And the one closest in age to me, we would have this game where it was kind of like the Golden Rule, but instead of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, it was whatever you do to me, I'm going to do back to you 10 times harder. And I would love this game. But it was always everything that I did to her, I would get back 10. It was never the other way around, right? So I would always and I loved it, right? So I would always be like, I'd go tap her on the shoulder, and then she'd be like, ugh, and then I'd kind of go and punch her, and then she would just throw me down. And we'd always set up mattresses everywhere so we could just throw each other down, If it sounds bad, I promise it was totally all in good fun. I loved it. But that was not the golden rule. That's not the golden rule we know, right? It's about doing unto others exactly as you would have them do unto you. And in fact, let's just look at the words of Jesus and how he articulated it in the Gospel of Matthew. He says, this is what our scriptures come to teach. In everything, in every circumstance, do to others as you would have them do to you. And we don't really talk about that first part, the part that comes before the golden rule, in which Jesus is basically saying you can simplify the entirety of the scriptures, right? In other translations, he says the entirety of the law and the prophets, meaning you can take this whole religious tradition. What he's referring to is, the Hebrew tradition, what we think of as Judaism, because that is who Jesus was, right? He was a Jew. And he's saying this whole tradition and lineage that we come from, you can really boil it down to this simple truth. And that is its power. Where religion can so often get complicated, right? And it's in the complexity that we get divided, because when we get all caught up in these complicated ideas, then it becomes about, well, who has the right interpretation of that idea? Who understands it better? That inherently divides us. Simplicity connects us to one another. And it's in that simplicity that our mantras can be embodied and lived out, rather than just remaining complex, abstract ideas. That when our mantras are subjective and they're simple, they are also livable, right? Think about one of maybe, I think, a pretty famous modern mantra, and you might recognize this one. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Now, this was actually, this is from the movie Forrest Gump, but it was said by Forrest's mother to him. But I think what's so powerful, if you look at the movie and you look at the life of Forrest Gump as portrayed through this movie, he actually lives out this mantra in a really powerful way. He's the kind of person where he accepts life, right, for all the good and the bad. He's not judgmental about the reality that's showing up in his life. He just embraces life and allows things to flow naturally. Right? And in a way, he embodies this mantra through that film. How about another mantra that you might be familiar with? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky, right? One of the greatest, if not the greatest hockey player of all time. And yet you don't need to play hockey to embody aspects of this mantra, to apply this mantra in your life. How many of us, probably very few of us know someone who actually regularly plays hockey, but we probably all know someone who lives out a version of this mantra, right? Someone who realizes that life involves putting yourself out there and not being afraid of failure, right? So mantras, in their most powerful, aren't just concepts. They're realities that we can live. And in that sense, mantras take us beyond words, right? They are using words, but in their simplicity, they help us to move beyond words into something that is livable because of the truth that it holds in the quiet of our own hearts. The great teacher Yogananda said that mantras are the creative expression of the voice of silence. A couple weeks ago, we talked about this word gnosis, Gnosis. And this word really is about an inner knowing, not a knowing conceptually, a knowing based on kind of written knowledge, but rather a knowing of our own intuition, right? An inner knowing that exists in the silence and the quiet of our own hearts. And mantras give voice to this knowing, right? They allow us to take these truths that exist and transcend language, and through the simplest of language, we can actually begin to live them out. So they're incredibly powerful and beautiful tools, and they can serve a number of functions in our lives. Mantras are reminders, right? They're reminders of what we may already believe and already know to be true, but sometimes in life we just forget, right? How many have heard the mantra, "This too shall pass"? Or the mantra, I am enough, right? Sitting in meditation, just reminding yourself, I'm enough, I'm worthy, right? These are truths that we probably already know on some level, in some part of our hearts. And yet it's so easy as we go through day-to-day life to forget the things that we already know. How many of you realize this? We know something and then we're like, how did I forget this? I'm not living this out, right? Mantras remind us and they bring us back. Mantras can also be promises of things that in different moments of our lives might be hard to believe. Julian of Norwich was a Christian mystic who lived in the 14th century. And she was very well known for this phrase that she came to this through her own experiences of mystic and contemplative meditations on the way of Jesus. And she said this, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. So this beautiful mantra, all shall be well. It's almost like saying it's all going to be okay. It echoes of what Brazilian author Fernando Sabino said, if it's not okay, it's not the end, right? Versions of saying, hey, there's something within me that believes that it's all going to be okay. And that promise is not something that we can always see, right? It's not something that we can always feel. It's not something that we always look around at the world around us and think, oh, that's the message I'm getting, right? And yet, there's something about a mantra like this that we can hold on to the promise of it, right? That we can know that somewhere deep within our hearts, I know for myself, even when I have a hard time explaining why, that I still, at the core of my being, believe these mantras to be true, right? So they're promises that we hold to even in our darkest moments. Sometimes mantras, they are a challenge to us. Think about the golden rule, right? The key word, I think, or at least one of the key words in the golden rule is do, right? It's something that we can actually take action about versus just simply reflecting on, right? Not just simply a message of how things are, but it's an inspiration of how things ought to be or can be if we want to participate. Right? Think about what Gandhi said. It's very similar. Be the change that you wish to see in the world. It's something that we can do. It's something that we can be. So mantras can challenge us to step out, right? To do maybe more than what we're currently doing. Mantras can also be invitations. Coming back to be here now. The present moment is happening. It's already all around us. And this mantra is simply an invitation to come join that which already is, but maybe we can't see or have a hard time accessing. Sometimes mantras are a reframe, right? Take this great mantra. You might have heard versions of it, but you might not have known that it came from the Lord of the Rings. Not all who wander are lost. This was actually written by J.R.R. Tolkien, though you probably saw it on a bumper sticker with like a camper van. And what I love about this mantra is that it recontextualizes what you might be currently going through, right? Maybe you felt like you were in a wandering phase in life, and yet the feeling that you had wasn't that you were lost, right? It was just that this was part of your journey, right? You could still feel at home even in the wanderings of life. So these mantras can help us reframe where we're at in our story. And instead of feeling negative about it, it helps you give it a more positive spin. It shifts your perspective. And taking all of these different functions that mantras can hold in our lives, taking all these into account, I want to shift from all these mantras in our own language and shift to a really powerful mantra from Eastern philosophy. And it includes part of the mantra that Denise wonderfully led us through today. And this is the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. How many of us have heard of this mantra? Well, it's one of the most well-known mantras in Eastern philosophy. You may have even heard it a couple weeks ago when we had our interfaith chant guests who provide lovely interfaith chant music for us, Two-Song, the band. And so they come and they bring wonderful different mantras from different cultures, right? And then they sing them through. And I do my best to put English translations of what they're saying just as a way of helping people connect to what's being said. And so one of the closest English translations that we have towards Om Mani Padme Hum is the jewel in the lotus. And when they were singing Om Mani Padme Hum a month ago, there were some people who had joined us for the first time that week. And Aldea is always something where if it's your first time, you might be going, all right, this is a little different from any church I've experienced before, and that's totally understandable. And particularly, there was someone who had come to visit for the first time that week, singing Om Mani Padme Hum, and when it got to that point in the service, and they saw this translation, the jewel in the lotus, they were thinking to themselves, like, what is the jewel in the lotus? Like, what is this place? Like, do I eat the jewel? Like, is this some kind of thing? I don't know, right? Is this a cult, And they were, when they told me this, it was all in a good fun, and they totally were fine with it. But, it's funny how you can, before understanding certain things, before giving clarity, you're kind of like, what are we actually talking about here? So I want to break down what the jewel in the lotus means. The lotus is a flower that blooms in the mud, right? It's this beautiful flower that comes through the mud. And it reminds me about all the times in my own life where the beauty of life, the flowers that showed up in my life, came through the mud. How many of us have had beauty in our life come through the mud of life, right? The jewel is that spiritual wisdom or understanding, as if to say, the greatest treasure that I can have in life is not wealth that I can physically hold, but it's my own journey, it's my own spiritual growth that I've been through. And so when we say the jewel in the lotus, what we are saying is that it is through the difficulties and challenges of life that we often find our greatest treasures. How powerful of a mantra is that, right? It's a mantra that can tell us, hey, when things got a little muddy in life, maybe that was when we began the path of spiritual self-discovery, right? Which turns out for so many of us to be the greatest treasure that we can ever have. And of course, these are just words, whether in our language or in another, but they do this wonderful work of giving us a new perspective on our own lives. So mantras, they can be incredibly powerful for individuals, and they can also be unbelievably helpful for communities, right? Because the more people that come together, the more that we are thinking together, and the more that we need tools for that thinking, right? And so mantras can be like a glue that holds community together. I think about the primary mantra of our community. How many of you know what it is? You want to say it? Right. Love period isn't so much a belief as it is a value. It's us coming together and saying, hey, we're holding love as our highest value. It's not telling you need to believe this or that to belong here. It's just letting us know that whatever love means to you, we are prioritizing love. And this mantra arose in our community's history when we were going through a shift nearly 20 years ago of rediscovering who are we, what kind of community are we going to be moving forward. This is the birth of Aldea, and this mantra came at the same time to help us to be a tool as we thought through our future. And what I love about this mantra is that it's simple, right? It's subjective, because what love period means to one person is not going to mean the same thing to another, and that's okay. And lastly, it can be embodied, right? We can live this out. We can be constantly thinking, how am I living out love period, right? Not only does it say that our highest value is love, but it is an invitation for you to put your own spin on it. What does that mean to you? Interpret it and live it out. So friends, my encouragement for you today, cherish your mantras, not because they did all the work for you, but because they were wonderful tools and companions on the journey. Remember that the meaning of your mantras are always going to be personal, and that's okay. And it's when we keep our mantras simple that we actually are able to embody them. Because how many of us know life is not just about what we say, it's about how we actually live, how we show up in the world. A mantra that has been really helpful for me, and I think helpful when I think about leading this community, is from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus. He says, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. And in the same way, friends, don't just say your mantras, become them.